Jordan Peele's independent horror movie Get Out is a surprising Best Picture hopeful at this year's Oscars, and as of recording this, the nomination list is not out yet, but it seems likely that the movie will be nominated. It's very rare for a horror movie to even be considered for a nomination, much less get a nomination, and to this day, the only horror movie to ever win Best Picture is 1992's Silence of the Lambs. That being said, I honestly think that Get Out deserves to be considered one of the best movies of 2017, not because I'm a sucker for horror movies, independent films, but because it is an extremely well-made movie aside from any of its racial or political intentions. From this point forward, there will be huge spoilers on Get Out. It is pretty much going to spoil the entire movie if you watch this video, but it's necessary for me to explain why it's so good. First of all, Get Out is an almost perfectly condensed, contained, and well-structured movie. There is not one single scene in this movie that's a throwaway. No character is random, no character is wasted. Every single thing you watch is there for a specific reason, and they all tie together to tell one complete story. In a lot of ways, this reminds me of the original Portal and how it was only a $20 game that you could beat in 5 hours, but every last square inch of it was made with purpose. The same is true of Get Out, and here is a mega list of examples. The very first scene in the movie is of an unknown black man getting attacked, put in a sleeper hold, and then kidnapped in the middle of a nice upscale neighborhood. Jordan Peele uses this scene for 2 different reasons, maybe 3, it does that as well, but firstly, Get Out is already framing these white, wealthy areas as scary and menacing, and trying to get the audience to identify and see things from a black man's perspective. Secondly, it sets in motion a major story element. Later in the movie, we meet Rose's creepy and possibly deranged brother who keeps talking about his martial arts skills, and he keeps wanting to fight Chris to prove it. They have a very uncomfortable dinner together, and pretty much nobody likes the brother, but for good reason. Then Chris meets the whitewashed black character that you see in all the trailers that screams "Get Out" in his face when he's confronted.
Get out! Yo! Yo! Chill, man! Get out! Chill! Chill, man! Chill!
This character is the same one who was kidnapped in the beginning of the film by Rose's brother. Her brother used his martial arts skills that he was bragging to Chris about to put him in a sleeper hold and put him in the back of the car and kidnap him. The person is acting very abnormal, very non-black, and very old-fashioned even amongst the older white people at the party. He's very out of place, he's shaved his beard, his clothing doesn't make sense, and something is inherently wrong here. The mannerisms are confusing beyond even brainwashing, which is the first clue in the movie that we're not just brainwashing black people, but it makes total sense when you consider the fact that this is a 95-year-old man who had his mind put into a new body. He is quite literally out of touch with the times. He has no idea how to dress and no idea how to interact with people of his apparent age. Identifying the kidnapped man sets in motion the discovery of the main plot and what's really going on. It ties into Chris's friend Rod, who's a little bit more than just comic relief. He's got a lot more going on. He does the detective work, and it sets up a critical political scene later on with the police officers, but I'm going to talk about that in its proper section. But the point being, the random kill at the beginning of the movie, the random tidbits you learn about these characters, they're all not wasted. None of them are throwaway. They're all very important to the core of the story, and pretty much everything works like that. We've got a few more of these examples coming up, so prepare yourselves for some more spoilers and for some more racial connotations. Early in the movie, Chris and Rose encounter a police officer on the way to the family home. The officer asks to see Chris's ID. Rose, being the good girlfriend, very vehemently defends him and says that he doesn't need to show his ID since he wasn't driving. The police officer insists that he see Chris's identification because he has the right to identify every person in the car. Rose gets very aggressive defending her boyfriend, and eventually the police officer backs down. This is initially framed as white police officer wants to shake down black man but is defended by loving white girlfriend. The scene does 2 things. Firstly, it makes you think that Rose is a good character and allows you to identify with her a little bit more, thus making her late movie betrayal all the more painful. Secondly, it clearly highlights Rose's ulterior motive. Rose is the recruiter, hunter, or the person that brings in the black people in for harvesting for her family. She isn't sticking up for Chris because she loves him or because the white cop is trying to shake down a black man. Rather, brother, she is trying to prevent the cop from seeing his identification so that his name never makes it onto an accident report, never goes into a police system, and the cop has no idea who he is. The family wants to harvest his body later on, so they don't want any evidence of him being anywhere near their home, and that's what Rose is doing instead of being a good girlfriend. We've got one more big one and then a few smaller ones. One of the key scary scenes in the trailers and what would later become the Get Out challenge is of the gardener running past the face of the main character Chris in a menacing way that is honestly very creepy. It's a detail that seems random and doesn't become clear until near the end of the film. But to explain it, you are first teased with a bit of info about Rose's grandfather getting beaten by Jesse Owens and not qualifying for the Olympics. Her father goes on to explain that he never really got over it, never really forgave Jesse Owens, and was salty about it for the rest of his life. Later that night, the gardener runs past Chris at breakneck speed and in a menacing manner. It seems random and strange, but later on in the movie, it's revealed that the family is harvesting black people's bodies to swap brains and extend their lives. It's a sort of pseudo-immortality where you can put your brain in a new body and live forever, and that's when you realize the grandfather is the family gardener. So why does he sprint around at night? It's because he's enjoying his new body and he's sprinting like he used to when he was young. It's a mind-blowing setup with an initial tease, foreshadowing, and then a twist that isn't even given full credit or much attention in the movie. There's also the racial connotation of the stereotype that black people run faster and the historical tie-in to Jesse Owens. Some shorter ones are the maid who is constantly doing her hair and makeup is not because she's creepy and crazy, but rather because that's Rose's grandmother who was always very vain about her looks. Now with her new body, she obsesses over her looks, her youth, and she tries to hide the scar on her head from the brain surgery. The creepy older woman at the party who feels up Chris's arm and mentions to her husband how strong he is not random or insulting for no reason. It wants to come off some kind of like weird cuckery or racism about black guys have big penises, but in actuality, it's the husband shopping for a new body to bone his wife with, and it's probably playing into the big black buck or the big penis black man stereotype as well. The Japanese guest, who if I'm not mistaken is about the only non-white person there that hasn't had their brains swapped, asks Chris if it is to his advantage or disadvantage to be an African American, and it's extremely awkward and random feeling for no reason. But in reality, he's considering the personal lifestyle changes he might have to make if he buys Chris's new body. By this point, you probably understand that the structure is top-notch. All of these things aren't random, they're not there to make you feel uncomfortable, they're not there to be her to her, white people are bad. They tie in very cleverly with the horror motif of the movie and the hidden agendas of everybody there. However, Get Out is a movie with political and racial elements. It's definitely a film with purpose. I went into this movie kind of expecting it to be a very simple her to her, white people are racist and don't trust them type of message, with lots of overtly racist or belligerent white characters. What I got was the exact opposite. Most of the white characters weren't the hateful Hitler type racists, but were rather the ignorant, wealthy, liberal, elite type racist. They weren't the backwater Klansmen that burn crosses. They were the ones that would talk about how they would love to vote for Obama a third time, but probably haven't spoken to a black person in their life outside of a worker-employer relationship. They managed to be incredibly offensive, rude, and downright intimidating without being overtly or intentionally hostile. So instead of a movie that craps all over Klan members and the alt-right, it gives all of its vitriol to the elite left. For me, this really hit home because I've seen these kinds of things in person, but from the other side. For example, in the late 2000s, I went to a house party in a southern antebellum mansion owned by some of the richer farmers in my small Mississippi town. By local standards, these people were nice and progressive. They didn't harbor any ill will toward black people, they didn't go to any Klan meetings, they had black friends in college and whatnot, but I went to this party and I introduced myself to everybody there, as is good southern manners, and was kind of working around, and I eventually bumped into a middle-aged black woman who was setting up some snacks for this party. I reached reached out, shook her hand, and introduced myself by name. She was timid, surprised, and kind of laughed at me. Then she informed that she was just the family maid and I didn't have to talk to her at all, and kind of left. Immediately afterwards, I turned around and saw the host family quietly holding back some laughs at me, not like busting out laughing, but they were kind of snickering at me. And the mother told me that while I was well-intentioned and it was nice to see that I considered the help to be guests, that there was no reason to talk to them, that they're just help. They're not really people, you know. And that was kind of an eye-opener for me. It was really shocking. So situations like that are real. I've run into them, and this movie highlights those very, very well, and it hit home just an emotional kind of feel sort of thing. Aside from that point, racial symbolism was used in the movie in almost every element of horror. The scenes were very well done to where most of the racial symbolism is recognizable without being heavy-handed, but even if the viewer doesn't understand any of these symbols, the scenes still function on their own. You could go in completely ignorant of any racial, political, or social context, and these scenes would still be creepy and uncomfortable. Having the racial elements on top just made them better. Some quick examples are the auction scene where the rich people are auctioning Chris's body is oddly reminiscent of a slave auction. In a way, since he's still going to be conscious while controlled, it is a slave auction. They're auctioning his body as a slave to another person. When Rod presents his evidence to police detectives for both the missing person from the beginning of the movie and for Chris, he's laughed at. Of note, all the people laughing at him are minorities as well. This scene is set up to show that authorities just don't care about black people, and because of modern circumstances, that even minorities are divided against themselves. So far, we've talked about two big things in this movie, which are the structure and the racial political elements, which are all very well done, but the acting is top-notch too. In Get Out, when people freak out, they really freak the hell out. Every scene is acted to make Chris, and thus the viewer who's there to identify with Chris, increasingly uncomfortable throughout the film. Rose and her family are doing double acting. They're pretending to be good in front of Chris and other people for appearances, when in actuality they're evil. The acting on this was good enough to fool me into thinking that Rose, and maybe even some of her family members, weren't all that bad until the big reveal at the end of the movie. Daniel Kaluuya, oh god, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, who is the main character Chris, does a great job at showing his discomfort and growing paranoia while still trying to make things work with his girlfriend and pretend to be normal. As a naturally paranoid person who's been through some kind of hard stuff as a kid, this really hits home for me. He absolutely nailed that feeling of being in an uncomfortable situation but trying to make it work and trying to put your paranoid personal instincts aside. As a base horror movie itself, it works. It's scary, it's deeply uncomfortable, it's violent, it gets gory. It is just a great scary movie aside from any of those other components. I mean, I thought it was just about brainwashing people, but the actual reality of what they were doing was so much worse. The concept of being conscious but unable to control your body while someone else pilots you around and you have to watch what they're doing with your body is downright horrifying. Some other fun facts are that it was an independent movie that was produced for just over $4 million, has no big name actors, at least not at the time. Some of them are doing better now. It was from a new director, Jordan Peele. It was his directorial debut. He'd never made a major movie before. It was not from any major studio that was later distributed through major studios, and it was released in February with no aspirations of winning Best Picture whatsoever. Those are just like little fun facts, little icing on the cake, but in summary, Get Out is an expertly made movie from a technical standpoint. It has good structure, it's well filmed, the colors look good, the editing is good, the sound effects are good, the music is good. God, I think the music was supposed to be like slave spirituals or something in some parts, but I'm not going to get into all that. But aside from all the technical stuff, it functions very well as a horror movie, and can also function as a movie that criticizes liberal racism, which is extraordinarily rare in itself, and wasn't even designed for Oscar bait. It was just designed to be a good movie, and for these reasons, I think it should win Best Picture. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, I hope you learned something useful, and if you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. If you've made it this far into the video, I've got a fun fact for you. Get Out's director, Jordan Peele, acted as a clown extra in the 2006 music video for I Write Sins Not Tragedies by Panic at the Disco. Who knew this sad clown had Oscar aspirations?